What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Awake and Jake College Football Show. This episode's coming out a little later than I intended it to be, but nonetheless, it's still here. It's just a little late. This is going to be a season recap episode, and actually, we're splitting this into two parts. So this is going to be part one. It was going to be too long, so we just cut it in half. I will be going through each conference. Be giving a grade for the conference as a whole, as well as going through and giving each individual team a grade, and then just a quick description as to why I graded them that way. Just a disclaimer, this is my recap, my rankings, my grade. You could probably convince me otherwise that some of these teams deserve a different grade, but this is what I settled on. I'm open to hear your arguments because, like I said, you could probably convince me, but this is what I came up with. But yeah, Big 10, Big 12 today. We'll do ACC, SEC later this week, and then I'll also include Notre Dame and the two Pac-12 teams, or Pac-2 teams, later on as well. So yeah, let's get right into it. Let's get stoned and talk some football. All right, before we get into the season recaps, let's just touch on some news real quick. Because I already did the episode kind of going through coaching changes, coordinator changes, but we've had a few pop up since then. Tom Allen, leaving Penn State, headed to Clemson to be their new defensive coordinator. I think that's great for Clemson. Ever since Brent Venables left, that defense has kind of trended downwards. Not that they were bad this year necessarily, but they weren't to that level that they had been. So I think this is a great hire for Clemson. Get them back to their roots, back to what Dabo likes to do. I like this hire for Clemson. Al Golden is leaving Notre Dame, headed to the NFL to be the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. He had been with the Bengals previously, headed back there, but this time as the defensive coordinator. And then probably the biggest and most shocking development over the last week or so, Jim Knowles has officially left Ohio State for Penn State to be their defense coordinator, replacing Tom Allen. I mean, that is a huge loss for Ohio State. You had the best defense in the country. Your defense had been struggling before Jim Knowles was hired. He comes in and instantly turns you guys around to having the best defense this last year. I think this is big for Penn State because it shows. I mean, you went from Tom Allen, who was a great defensive coordinator, and you had one of the best defenses in the country, to Jim Knowles. You lost him thinking, oh, great, now we're going to probably downgrade on defense, and you actually upgraded. You bring in Jim Knowles, who, again, just came from Ohio State, who won a national championship game, had the best defense in the country. Great hire for Penn State. And I think Ohio State's going to be fine. They have the money to get whatever defensive coordinator they want. They have the money to buy any player they want. Ohio State is going to be fine. But Penn State stock just went up a little bit, in my opinion. Even if Tom Allen hadn't left for Clemson and he was sticking around another year, I was going to be high on Penn State. But bringing in Jim Knowles to be your defense coordinator bumps them up a little more for me going into next season. I think that's a huge get for them. Season recaps, though, we are going to do, I mentioned it earlier, Big 10, Big 12, get the big conferences out of the way, and then SEC, ACC later on. We're going to start with the Big 10. Overall, I mean, it's hard not to give the Big 10 an A+ on the season. I know they had some teams that were not necessarily great, but of the Power 4 conferences, they were clearly the best conference. So you could, I guess, convince me to bump them down to an A, I guess. But they had 4 teams make the playoff, 2 make it to the Final Four, and one of them won the national title. In my opinion, it is hard to argue anything other than the Big Ten being an A+. Again, you could maybe make an argument for it to be an A, but nothing lower than an A. No A-, no B+, none of that. You had 4 teams make the playoffs. One of them won the national title. A+ season for the Big Ten. I'll run through each team. We'll go alphabetically instead of how they finished. So Illinois, I'm going to give them an A. a 9-3 season when nobody expected you to have a 9-3 season, and finished with a win against a playoff snub in South Carolina, and never got talked about as a team who should be making the playoff. South Carolina did, and Illinois beat them. Illinois was never discussed as a 9-3 team to make the playoff, and honestly, they should have. Now, obviously, with that bowl win, they finished 10-3. I get that. Most of these records I'm giving out we're talking regular season only, not including conference championship game, playoff, anything like that. So, or bowl game. So 9-3. I understand they went 10-3 because they won the bowl game. 9-3 season though, nobody expected that. What a great year for Illinois. Indiana, A+. Honestly, A+. Your before bowl season and playoffs or anything like that, you went 11-1 and lost to the eventual national champion. It's hard to complain about that. It's hard to be upset about that, especially when you look at the expectations coming into the season. They were very low. I know there's some people out there, Blutman and whatnot, who were very high on Indiana going into this season. Not necessarily 11-1 high, but bowl game high. And I know there was a lot of people who thought, no way Indiana's making a bowl game. 11-1, you make the playoff, you lose in the playoff first round, fine, whatever. But both teams that you lost to made the national title game. You guys had a fantastic season. You cannot argue anything other than an A+. Like I said, Big Ten, you can maybe bring me down to an A. I'm telling you right now, for Indiana, A+ season, you're not convincing me otherwise. Iowa, I'm going to give them a B-. You could argue that up to a B if you want, but I'm going to go B-. Significantly better offensively this year than they were last year. So that's where most of this comes into effect, but still flawed. Their offense was still very flawed. And the defense did take a step back this year. Not that the defense wasn't good, so don't get mad at me, Iowa fans, and say that I say your defense is shit. It's not. It was still a very good defense. It just took a step back. Now, offense improved. That was great, but it was still flawed. You could argue this up to a B. You could, and I would maybe agree with you. You could argue this down to a C+, and I honestly might agree with you. I'm going to say somewhere in the middle, B-. Maryland. Yuck. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody really thought Maryland was going to be a great team this year. So it's not like their expectations were super high. Finished 4-8 and lost 5 straight to end the season. That's not great. You're 4-3. Like, okay, we could at least make a bowl game at worst. It'll be fine. And then you just lose 5 straight. It's just sad, terrible. What a rough season. C-. You could argue that lower. The only reason I put it at a C- is just because we're not looking at a, spoiler alert, Florida State here or anything like that where people actually expected something of them and then they come out and only win 2 games. So it's not like people were expecting the world of Maryland. That's where I'll give them a C-. If you want to give them a D+, a D, I guess I'm not going to disagree. I just think based on their expectations, we can't fault them too much for having a bad season. Michigan, C. Absolute C season. Defending national champions, and they struggled all season. And honestly, if I'm going to be 100% honest here, the only reason I have Michigan at a C and not lower is because they beat Ohio State to end the season. If they had not beat Ohio State, we're looking at D+ season. What a terrible, terrible season to come off a national championship. Beating Ohio State saved you guys from being an absolute failure. Michigan State, I have them at a C. I mean, they kind of just did what people expected. Not good, but they also weren't the worst team in the Big Ten. They were just average to below average, so honestly, C-. It's hard to see anything higher than a C, though. You try to tell me C+, B-, I'm going to shoot you down right there. Minnesota, and actually, you know what? We're gonna do a Minnesota minute here. Uh, and I'm just gonna pivot real quickly away from football. I usually wait until it's official. Well, I guess it's officially the off season, but I wait till I'm done season recap and everything before I try to talk anything Minnesota basketball. I have to go on my rant. I have been a huge fan of Ben Johnson. I said it last year how anybody that's upset with him and wanted him fired last year or whatnot, or even the year before that, I don't think many people were actually saying that, but there was people who were not a fan of Ben Johnson towards the end of last season. Don't try to tell me that they weren't. I saw it on Twitter. There was people upset with Ben Johnson. I love Ben Johnson. I think he's a great coach, and I think he's been handed a terrible situation, and he is just trying to make something happen, trying to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. It's just, it was rough stepping into it, and he just keeps getting punched in the face, but he keeps getting back up, and he keeps fighting and coaching his ass off. Beginning of the season was rough for Gopher basketball, and I definitely I was on the fence because, man, I really didn't think Ben Johnson had really been given a fair shot just with NIL money and what he walked into when he started as a coach. I just didn't think he really been given a fair shot. Now, this is his fourth season, but again, what he was coming up from, we've made strides. We've made huge strides. But it was rough to start this season. And I was kind of on that fence where when people started calling for his head, I didn't like it. I even was texting my buddy saying if he gets fired, he's going to get hired somewhere else as a head coach, and he is going to thrive because he's going to have more support than he does here. And it's just going to be unfortunate to see. But man, he has turned it around. Credit to him. Credit to this Gopher basketball team. I'm so happy to see them turn it around because I did not want him fired, and I was starting to get nervous that he might get fired. I'm not saying that he still won't. I hope he doesn't. I think he's doing enough to not be. But Ben Johnson's the guy. We need to give him a fifth year. Please don't fire him. Please do not call for his head. It will get better. He is doing everything he can, and he just keeps getting punched in the face every time he tries to do anything. Look at Elijah Hawkins and all the talent that left in the portal, which we thought were returning. It's been rough for him. That is my little Minnesota rant. Like I said, I try to wait till it's the actual offseason to do these, but it had to happen because the Gophers are on a 3-game winning streak and Ben Johnson's coaching his ass off. Minnesota football this season, I'm giving them a B. Exceeded everyone's expectations, but they did still have a few bad losses. So if you wanted to bump this down to a B minus C plus, I get it, because while yes, they exceeded people's expectations and that deserves a high grade, like I mentioned, they had a few losses that they want back, let's be honest. Nebraska, people might disagree with this, but even Nebraska fans might disagree. You made a bowl game for the first time in a long time, and you did it while having a true freshman at quarterback. I don't care if he's a 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, whatever. It's still not a red shirt, a true freshman quarterback that you are throwing out there in the Big Ten, the best conference in the country. And spoiler alert, no conference gets ranked as high as the Big Ten did in my rankings. I give Nebraska's season a B. And people might think I'm crazy for that, but the fact that you had not made a bowl game since, 2016? Basically a decade since you made a bowl game, and you did it again, like I said, with a true freshman. Yes, he's a 5-star. It's still a true freshman. That's something to be proud of. You can maybe give them a B minus C plus, I guess, but I give them a B on the season. And it hurts me to say that because I'm not a Nebraska fan. Nebraska pisses me off. I don't like them. I don't like their fans that much. They are not the worst fan base, but they're not a great fan base. Don't mistake my words. It's not that they're not passionate and they don't have a lot of fans. It's just they piss me off. But again, not the worst. But yeah, it hurts me to say that. I give them a B on the season. Northwestern. We're going to go C minus. 4-8 season. You kind of did what was expected, though. Honestly, you didn't exceed anyone's expectations, but nobody expected you to do much anyways. But 4-8's pretty bad. I guess that's typical where Northwestern's always been historically, but I'll give them a C minus. But somebody wants to say a D, I'll say that. I'm all for it. Oregon. The only reason Oregon does not get an A plus on their season is because they didn't make the national championship game or win it. But number one for most of the season, finished the regular season undefeated, won the Big Ten championship game, made the playoffs, and then you lost to an Ohio State team that just had everything clicking at the right time, who ended up winning the national championship game. If you want to say that Oregon deserves to have an A plus grade, that's fine. I agree. They probably should. I'm just saying they didn't win the national championship game. I'm docking them a little bit for that. I skipped over Ohio State, and that was not on purpose. People are going to disagree with this, I think. I'm not giving them an A plus on the season. I know they won the national championship game, but that also was their expectation this season. Their expectation was championship or bust. The only thing that is keeping this from being an A plus is Michigan. You lost to Michigan at home. Can't do that and expect me to give you an A plus on the season, even though you won the national championship. A season. I will not argue any. You try to tell me it's an A minus season, a B plus season, I'm going to shoot you down and say no. Ohio State had an A season. Didn't have an A plus season, but it was an A. Penn State. I struggle with this one. I'm giving them an A minus. Because it's the same story with Penn State every year. You beat the teams that you were supposed to beat and still couldn't beat the teams that you weren't. You made the Big Ten championship game, which was great. That doesn't typically happen for you. And you also made the playoffs, which is great because that typically doesn't happen for you. But any other year, you would not have made the playoffs, and it would have been same story, different year. Penn State is what they are. They beat the teams they should beat. Still can't beat the ones they can't. A minus season. You want to tell me this is a B plus season? I won't disagree. Purdue. Let's be honest, F. I mean, people's expectations were not high. Oh, and also, most of these grades I'm doing like on a scale of 1 to 10 and kind of going from there. Purdue gets a 1 out of 10. I debated giving them 0, but I decided to be nice. Expectations were not high for Purdue by any means. Nobody expected them to have a good year. But they still couldn't even meet those expectations. I shouldn't say easily, but I'm gonna easily the worst team in Power 4. Just terrible, all around terrible. Rutgers, B minus. I give them a B minus because they started strong, hit a slump, and then ended up turning it around. I think when it comes to it, they met the media expectations. You know, when you look at the mainstream media, ESPN, Big Ten, anybody who covers college football at a national level, Rutgers is kind of what most people expected based on their record and whatnot. But I think if you covered that Rutgers team, if you were involved with that Rutgers team at all, I think they fell short of their own expectations. I think they expected to surprise people this year. They expected to win 1 or 2 more games than they actually did. And I think they fell short of their own expectations. So I'm giving them a B minus, even though they met more than likely most of the media's expectations, fell short of their own. UCLA, I'll give them a C. Started very rough, started looking like an F-type season, started looking like possibly worse than Purdue, which is not really possible, but it started rough. But they turned it around once they got through the gauntlet part of their schedule, and props to you, you're not the worst team in the Big Ten. USC, I'm giving them a D+. Not a great start to their Big Ten tenure. A ton of just one score, come from behind losses that they just gave up. It was just a ton of disappointing losses that they wish they could have back. And because of that, based on USC fans' expectations, but I think just some media members' expectations for USC, how they were just going to waltz in and waltz into the Big Ten and have no problem. Obviously, that was a little naive on their part, and I think most real Big Ten fans, people who actually watch Big Ten or are a fan of Big Ten teams, knew that this wasn't going to happen. So I think based on their own expectations, media's expectations, and then how bad some of those and disappointing some of those losses were, D+. Washington, I'll give them a C. You did just about what everybody expected. Middle of the pack, not the worst, not the best. Just an team. A C team, an average team. You passed. Let's just put it that way. Wisconsin, this gives me so much joy to say it. Wisconsin got a D for their season. And if you wanted to tell me they got a D- or an F, I won't say no. They did not meet expectations whatsoever. And they missed out on a bowl game for the first time in, I don't even remember what it was, 20 plus years, some crazy number like that. Awful season for Wisconsin, one that they wish they could have back. It was ugly anytime they had to play a team with a competent team or quarterback, and it was rough, and it was fun to watch as a Minnesota fan. So those are all my grades for the Big Ten teams. Again, some of them you can argue one way or the other, and I might agree with you depending on your argument. But yeah, overall, the Big Ten does get an A+ just for how many teams they put in the playoff and the fact that they won the national championship for the second year in a row. Moving on to the Big 12. I'm having a hard time grading this conference because you could argue that, actually, I don't think you could really argue. I think it's a fact that this was the most exciting conference. And you could also argue or state for a fact that this was one of the toughest conferences to win. Now, the reason I say it was the toughest conference to win solely because everybody in the Big 12, for the most part, could beat everyone in the Big 12. There was no absolute dominant team at the top. There was no Texas. There was no Ohio State and Penn State. There was no teams like that. It was everybody could beat everybody, and we started to see that at the end there. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean your teams are good. You could have just a bunch of average teams fighting for the top there. So there's that. I give them a B. That's what I decided to settle on. I think because if we look, they only had one team make the playoffs, which you could argue deserves them to be a little lower grade. But then again, when we look at preseason, I don't think anybody really thought that more than one Big 12 team was going to make the playoff. I think we all just assumed whoever won the Big 12 championship game probably made the playoff, and then something crazy would have to happen for a second team to make it. It's just, I think with the expectations heading into the season, the fact that it was a tough conference to win, everybody could beat everybody, made for exciting football, those tiebreakers at the end of the season, I didn't even get through all of them because it was just absolutely insane. Felt like, though, like I said, preseason only ever going to be one team that made it, and it stood that way, so I give them a B on the season. Each individual team, though, Arizona. We're just, same with Big Ten, we're going to go alphabetical, and Arizona, man, D-. You had a surprise year last year. You lost your coach, but you kept your star quarterback and your star wide receiver and finished 4-8. Just lost all the magic you had from last year. Now, granted, you did lose talent. I understand that you did lose your coach, but you kept your star quarterback and you kept your star receiver. It just blew up early, and it was rough to watch. Arizona State, A+. Honestly. Yes, they went 10-2, so they had 2 losses. One of those was without their starting quarterback. A+ season. No one thought that highly of this team going into the season, and they go 10-2, win the Big 12, made the playoffs, and then they almost knocked off Texas in the playoff. It's hard to argue anything other than an A+, just based on them exceeding everybody's expectations alone. Just that alone deserves an A season. Great season for Arizona State, A+. Baylor, B, which I guess is a good grade. because most figured that Baylor would have fired Dave Aranda by the end of the season, halfway through the season, something like that. Especially after they started 2-4. I think once they started 2-4, everybody was like, "Oh, all right. Which week is it that they fire him?" And then he won the next week, so they're like, okay. I guess next week we'll fire him. We can't fire him after a win. And then he won again, and again, and again. And he won 6 straight, or Baylor won 6 straight to finish out the regular season. Started 2-4, finished 8-4. You kept your coach for another year. B season. BYU, no one really had these expectations for BYU, and they started the season 9-0. Now, they lost 2 of their last 3, but it was still a great season for them. And like I said, no one expected them to be that good. Cincinnati, C. Not good, not bad. Not the worst, I should say. You have a win against Arizona State, good for you. Nothing really more to say to that other than it was just not a good season, but it wasn't the worst. Colorado, I'll give them a B+. It was a pretty good season. It started rough, but they turned it around, and they were in contention for the Big 12 championship towards the end. And honestly, I guess borderline playoff contention as well then. I think they exceeded some people's expectations. It was hard to see. You either love Colorado or hate them, and depending on your personal feelings towards them kind of dictated how you thought they were going to be this season. So Colorado's hard to judge if they actually exceeded the media's expectations, just because, let's be honest, everybody was pretty biased. But turned around that rough start, good end to the season. Houston, I'm going to give them a D+. And you could argue, I guess, I should give them a C because technically no one expected them to have a good season. So for them to go, 4-8, that was to be expected, honestly. So nobody was really shocked by that. So I guess you could say that they deserve a C grade for that alone. Because, nobody expected them to have a good season, and they didn't. They didn't have a good season. They showed fight, and I think there is hope for the future. But I think I probably messed up that grade a little bit and probably should be a C just because this is exactly what we expected of them. Iowa State B+. Started 7-0, finished 10-2, played for the Big 12 championship game. You were talked about as to making the playoff until you lost 2 of the final 5 games. Still a really good season, B+. Kansas. This one I struggle with because they weren't good this year. You look at their record and not great. And they started terrible. They went 5-7 this year. That's not a great record. Now they started 2-6 and won 3 of their final 4. What makes me bump this up to a C-, because we had, or at least I did, and I feel like a lot of the media did, high hopes for Kansas going into this season. And then they started 2-6. Now, like I said, they won 3 of their final 4, and 3 of those teams that they beat were all fighting for Big 12 championship spots and possibly playoff spots. So they just started playing spoiler at the end of the season, pissing everybody off. It was fantastic. I loved it. But because we had such high expectations and they started so terrible, I wanted to give them a D. It's because they won 3 of their final 4 and who those 3 wins came against that I gave them a C-. Kansas State, I'll give them a B. Finished the regular season 8-4. Preseason, they had high hopes of playing in the Big 12 championship game, potentially making the playoffs. Your boy may have picked them to make the playoffs, or at least be contending for them. And by the time the season ended, they were nowhere close to competing for that. B season, you could argue lower, and I wouldn't disagree. Oklahoma State, man, F, failure, terrible season, a ton of returning starters, no more Texas, no more Oklahoma, and you just fell flat on your face and went 3-9. What an absolute embarrassment. Everybody had high hopes for Oklahoma State. Like I said, no more Texas, no more Oklahoma. It's your conference to win. and you couldn't do shit. Rough to watch. I guess it was a Big 12 team, so their games are always fun. But man, if you were an Oklahoma State fan, I am so sorry because you had such high hopes this season. I know you did. You don't even lie to me and tell me you didn't. TCU, I'll give them a B. Finished 8-4, very good season. Not a great season, but a very good season. I'll give them a B. Texas Tech, I'm going to give them a B as well because honestly, 8-4, very good season, exact same as TCU. I almost view those two teams as identical this year. Central Florida. Now, expectations were not very high for Central Florida, but they didn't even meet those expectations. They finished 4-8, and Gus Malzahn wasn't even fired. He left for an offensive coordinator position. He didn't even leave to be a head coach of somewhere for some other team. No, he left to be an offensive coordinator. Central Florida gets a D+. This season was sucked for them. Utah, I could be a little biased here because of my love for Utah, and based on some injury, concerns with Cam Rising this season, I did not give them a failure. But if I'm unbiased, I probably should. I give them a D, which is not good, because, let's be honest, they had all the expectations in the world to win the Big 12. Injuries, lack of offense yet again, set them back to 5-7, and they were nowhere close to sniffing the Big 12 championship. Again, you could probably say that it should be a failure of a season based on that alone, and I might be a little biased, but I'm giving them a D. And the fact that I'm being biased and giving them a D does not mean much because a D is still a terrible grade. West Virginia, C-. After a surprise season, some people had high expectations for this team, only for them to barely make a bowl game and fire their coach. Just a all-around ucky season, C-. Expectations were too high for you to get a C, anything higher than a C-. All right, so those are my grades for the Big 10 and the Big 12. Again, you can argue some of my grades, and I completely understand. Some of them can be argued one way or the other. But I thank you all for joining me. I'll be back later this week with the ACC, SEC, and then Notre Dame in the Pac-2. So yeah, I'll talk to you then.